Now moving on to our plenary. I'm delighted to welcome Paul Burstow, our President and Conference Chair. Paul's extensive first-hand knowledge of the care sector as Care Minister has positioned him well to influence, challenge and mentor the tech sector to reach its full potential and positioning within our health and care landscape. In January 2018, we launched our new company, Tech Services Association, CIC. We also set up a subsidiary, Tech Quality, with key aims and objectives to set, review, and certify technology-enabled care quality standards. As interim chair, Paul has mentored sound governance and business strategy and worked with myself to recruit a new chair, which will be announced very shortly. Paul will now take up his new position of chair of the CIC to challenge, critique, and influence a new direction for the organisation and define our ambitions for the future. May I welcome your conference chair, Paul Burstow.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you very much, Kay. What a fantastic, incredibly moving story. And I have to say, I was sitting there with David and others and just thinking to myself that that's why we're in this room, that her story is actually the story which should be the thing that fires and motivates and drives all of us to want to do better, to want to act and deliver better results for everyone. And the sort of notion that Kay's story is about how it gives herself back to herself, I thought was incredibly powerful. Now, my job is partly to sort of set the scene for the next 2 days and then introduce our next speaker. So what I want to do is, over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, is say a little bit about some of the issues, really about this burning platform that we're all encountering, I suspect, in our day jobs, whether it's as commissioners of services, whether it's as the providers of solutions to those challenges. So what I want to do is first set some context, because I think this is the moment for this sector. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a systematic building of a case, a repositioning of this organisation, and a really great opportunity beginning to emerge as a result of that. So some context. Living in this country today, already alive, are 10 million people who will live to see their 100th birthday. They will receive that telegram from Her Majesty, or maybe His Majesty, in due course. But they are alive today. They are there, and we have an opportunity to think about how that generation who will become centenarians, and by 2048 there will be over 100,000 people in this country who will have celebrated their 100th birthday, how much that needs to be borne in mind in terms of how we design services and how we respond to people's bucket lists and to their desires. And the nature of our population, the shape of it is changing. Lower birth rates, longer life expectancy is transforming the shape of our population. And this is something that's going on not just in this country, as we know, it's a global phenomenon, and it is something to celebrate. I think too often in our media and in our debates about this, we see it as a source of consternation. Well, clearly, it needs to be a source of innovation and inspiration when it comes to what we need to be doing. And very often, the language around ageing is language of negativity, of a problem. But I wanted to put up another slide, which comes from some work by the Royal Volunteer Organisation. And they commissioned some economic analysis of the contribution of the older part of our population. £76 billion of goods and services purchased by people over the age of 65. £34 billion worth of informal care. The granny and grandfather looking after the granddaughter or the grandson whilst the parents are able to get out to work. But those are contributions, 175 billion. And perhaps I think the answer to understanding this is that we still have in our minds a lifespan that is far shorter than the lifespan that most of us can anticipate. And a key way, I think, to begin to move away from possibly some of the stereotyping is to begin to think about what a 100-year life might look like in terms of the stages that are part of it. And this is a piece of work done by the Centre for Better Ageing. And I'm sure that when David Pearson, who I will introduce to you shortly, speaks, he will say more about the state of our social care system, the state and pressures that are on it, especially here in England. But I thought I might just share a few thoughts as well. And the first thing is there are plenty of gaps. There are funding gaps, there are staffing gaps, there are many pressures in our system. And the first thing to say about our system is that it's not state-funded, it's state-subsidised. And indeed, at our conference last year, Glenn Garrett, who will be speaking again tomorrow, made it very clear that this is a system that's not fully funded by the taxpayer. We as individuals face the prospect of very significant costs as individuals too. And the level of subsidy is insufficient to meet the demographic challenge that I've just talked about, posed by longevity, but also posed by the rise of multiple morbidity as we age across the life course. But this is not just an issue of money. It's also an issue of workforce, and the National Audit Office earlier this year really put the spotlight on the workforce challenges that exist as well. This is a sector beset by rising vacancy and turnover rates, and Skills for Care say that by 2030 we will need an extra 700,000 people working in this system. That 27.8% turnover figure that's up on the chart there, what does that represent? Maybe I should put a figure on it. According to work done by the Chartered Institute for Personal Development and their estimates of the costs of managing recruitment and dealing with turnover, the cost to the care sector of that turnover rate is £700 million every year. That's £700 million going out the door, not actually delivering any change whatsoever when it comes to the quality of care. That's money that could be used differently and needs to be used differently in the future. And we also know that the rate of progress in terms of this sector's ability to recruit and grow its workforce has, over the last few years, slowed. And some work done on behalf of the charity Independent Age estimates that this is not a far-off problem. This is a here and now challenge. And that we see a shortfall within the workforce of maybe 200,000 as soon as 2020. And just recently, the Migration Advisory Committee published its view about some of these issues around the workforce, because very often it's said, well, this is a workforce that is very reliant on migrant workers. And what they've said in their report is that that's possibly not the right conclusion to draw at all. In fact, their conclusion is that the fundamental issue is that this is not a sector, in terms of terms and conditions, that is attractive enough to resident workers to actually work in. And their rather simplistic solution was that we should put more money into the system. Maybe a statement to the blindingly obvious, but from this particular committee, a very powerful, maybe inconvenient message for the government. But this is not just a question of labour markets and labour supply. It's also a question of capital and whether or not we have the right estate and the right assets in place to meet future needs. And at the moment, 8 out of 10 of the UK's care homes are over the age of 50. Some cases well over the age of 50. And the Competition and Markets Authority, who published their analysis of the state of the funding arrangements and state of the care home market in the UK, found that 1 in 4 care homes have 75% or more of their funding coming from the local authority sector and from local authority residents living in those homes. And we know, because of the squeeze on public sector funding for local authorities, that that's been passed on to some degree in terms of the funding for the care home sector. And we know that from the work done by the CMA, that we are not funding the residential sector at the level necessary to cover not just their operating costs, but also the costs of capital, the costs of replacement of assets. And as this quote from the report says, we face the prospect of many of these homes not being able to update, modernise and replace themselves. So the question really has to be, when does a tipping point tip because the Care Quality Commission in its last 2 years' worth of reports has said we're approaching a tipping point. Well, the answer was given just last week by the Care Quality Commission in their most recent State of Care report. And what they have said is that when it comes to individuals' experience of the care system, with an increasing numbers of people with unmet needs, that they are experiencing this tipping point only too real in their own lives. So what do we have to do as a sector? We have to change the story, because that's all about gloom and doom, but actually there is a positive story to be told as well about what this sector can and is doing. And Kay, with her story, speaks very powerfully to what is possible through the smart use of technology. And what we have been doing at the TSA over the last few years is beginning to change the narrative, change the story that we tell, so that we actually are not just meeting Kay's challenge of finding more Ks, but actually finding ways in which we can encourage commissioners and others to look afresh at what this sector has to offer. So what do we do? Over the last 2 years, we published 2 industry white papers. Alison has already spoken about these. In 2016, we published our white paper, Putting People First, and it argued that we need to move from simply seeing ourselves as the purveyors of equipment to being the advocates for solutions and partners with commissioners when it comes to working, and also that we need to make sure at the heart of those solutions are the voices and lived experiences of people who use those services, who rely upon those services. And just last year, we published our report mapping out the implications of the opportunities and the opportunities of that switch off of the analogue telephony services in the 2020s. And of course, our position as an organisation is paramount, is the question of safety and reliability of what comes next. But we can't just settle there. We also have to be focused on the opportunities, the extra functionality of digital channels that can be unlocked. And that means several things in terms of how we have to work as an industry, how we have to work and partner with our colleagues in local government, in other services. First, we have to be far, far more collaborative in the way in which we work. That's the way in which we change the adoption landscape, make it a more friendly adoption landscape where we get some of the pace that we all so desperately want to see. And that means we have to work with business to business, we have to work business to commissioner, and we have to work providers to citizens. And we also need to recognise that it's essential that what we are doing is interoperable, that the solutions we are offering, if we're in solution mode, are interoperable. Because if they're not, I think we will fail to realise our potential, and we will be knocking at doors that will not open to us in the way that they should. And we've had a powerful story today about self-care and that ability to take back control of a person's life by the use of VR. And quite clearly, the ability to use data to underpin that, to provide useful feedback and insight to support the way in which people self-care, to be more proactive, is a very key thread and theme of this 2-day conference. We'll be hearing about some of the proactive work that's been developed in Spain over the last few years. And Alison has talked about quality. And this is an essential part of the mission of the TSA, and now Tech Quality and its separate role as an independent advocate for the quality standards framework of the TSA. And that credibility and independence of the QSF really is absolutely critical to the future. And as to the future, well, later this year in England, we will see the NHS publish a 10-year plan with a 5-year funding commitment from the government to deliver further investment in our NHS. And it's going to focus on some things that are absolutely at the heart of what we'll be talking about at this conference over the next couple of days. Issues around how we better address frailty and long-term conditions, how we manage those things in a more holistic way, addressing the needs of the person and what matters to them, not just addressing the condition. Of how we make sure that the sort of journey that social care has been on over the last few years around personalisation is a journey that the NHS goes on as well and accelerates and increases the pace of. And how we support, again through interoperability, the integration of care delivery and of systems. And I think we will see some real opportunities coming out of that NHS plan, and we have to be ready and waiting with our offer too. And then Alison's spoken already about the industrial strategy, and particularly the strand around healthy ageing and the grand challenge there. And we are waiting with bated breath for the announcements around the second wave of funding for this grand challenge. And we at the TSA absolutely are up for working with partners to deliver a vision of a transformed care offer for people in later life, but one that isn't just about dealing with the consequences, but actually is one about trying to manage and prevent and postpone the need for care in the first place. So we have an exciting and ambitious 2-day programme, an exciting, ambitious programme of activity. I'm really looking forward to the next 2 days and looking forward to hearing the many speakers that we will have both on this stage and around the conference. I hope all of you will have a fantastic 2 days of networking and opportunities to explore the possibilities of what your businesses can offer and what commissioners in this room can expect from you as well. So thank you very much for being here, and my next task is to introduce David Pearson. I want to say a few words about him. Thank you very much.